Welcome back, guys, to another episode of The Product Pivot. I'm here with my amazing co-host, Megan. My name is Santi, and today's guest is Brody. I'm going to switch it over to Brody to let him introduce himself and share a little bit more about his story.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. Very pumped to be here today. So my name is Brody Clemmer. I'm the lead product manager at a startup company called Little Otter. I have been with Little Otter for about 2 months, but I've been within the product realm and the product world for about 11 years now. And I've really been kind of all over the map. And, like a lot of product managers, just kind of fell into it. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys about the next generation of product leaders and product managers, but also really just kind of give insight into a different way of thinking about a career in product management.
I was super excited to have you on this podcast, Brody. I do want to share just like a tiny bit about like how we met. We were actually in a community called Generalist World. I believe it's its name. And both of us kind of like fell into that community due to our background of being like generalists as well, which is definitely something that I like love about myself, is that I can consider myself a generalist and that I have these skills in all these different realms. And I think that there's so many PMs out there who have those generalist skills as well, or even someone that might be in a different department and consider themselves a generalist and how they might pivot into product. And I would just love to like pick on that a little bit and see if there's any type of like generalist skills that you may have that you think contributed to your path to product management.
It's a great question. Yeah, and shout out to Millie over at Generalist World. They're putting together a really awesome community of really very cool people. I think one of the things that I think led me not only to Generalist World, but also I think was just inherently part of the personality of a lot of product managers is just an intense curiosity. And I think that like that is to me a trait and a quality that I hold very dear. Like I think like if there's one trait professionally or personally that I try to emphasize and like really lean on, it is that intense curiosity. And I think that like when I talk to a lot of product managers and when I talk to aspiring product managers, I think you really need to have that. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many generalists also kind of have a really good product mindset, not necessarily a good product manager, which I think, we'll talk about a little bit, the difference between the two. But I think that having that product mindset and that product thinking, it ties hand in hand with like an intense curiosity and the ability to kind of live in ambiguity for a while and live in that problem space.
I just want to like dive into like question number one. And it's probably like my favorite question that we ask. And that is like, is there a pivotal moment that you saw that was like, yeah, I want to be a PM. I want to be a product manager?
No, I didn't. So I think, like context is a lot of the story behind like how people came, to be product managers. I always say, so like I actually came from, I guess, more of an entrepreneurial background. So I had my own company for a while with a business partner of mine, and we grew that, and it was really awesome. And we did that for like 4 years and kind of bootstrapped it. And that was so exciting. And it was really cool. It was just kind of a web development firm. But I would say it was actually like full cycle, right? So we did a lot of product things. But at that point in time, like I was 22, like I had no idea what product was. I never went to college. So like I went straight into the workforce out of high school. And I think that entrepreneurial mindset started to lead me into jobs that allowed me to think holistically about business problems and how to create the most value for the business and for the end users. And so product management was never really even my title until like, I think it was 2017, something like that, because I went through all these jobs that had like these very strange titles, like things that like somebody called me like an innovation director one time. And I'm like, what does that even mean? Right. But, at the end of the day, the job itself was a product manager. And then I think when product management started to really kind of come to the front come into foresight in smaller organizations. It had existed in, the FANGs for a while, but like in smaller organizations, when everybody was like, oh, do we need a product manager? Like, do we need this person? Nobody knew what it was. So they hired kind of this like generalist, like business product minded kind of. And I think that's where a lot of product managers who have been in the industry for a while, in startups specifically, have kind of gotten their start, at least is kind of what I've found. But it's very different today.
Yeah, I can relate a lot to that actually, the startup background. I think Santi can as well, because her and I both have similar backgrounds. So we're startups and funny titles, doing PM work. And so it really stood out to me that you said you entered the workforce right out of high school, because her and I also have very similar experiences there. So I think I feel once you get into the workforce, I think you have to solve those problems, and you get unique experiences to solve those problems. And Santi, I mean, I think that we've talked about this before, but maybe you could share that with Brody as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, very similar to you, Brody. I graduated high school and I was accepted to a few universities, but my heart was not like set on any one thing. Like I knew deep down it wasn't going to be what I wanted. So I went straight to work, literally. And what helped me kind of do this pivot into eventually what would be product is just continuing to take the skills I was learning at the time and what role I was in and then applying them to the next thing. So I'm really glad that you did mention that you don't have like a degree or a diploma or anything, because there's still a smidge of stigma out there about that, I find, and I'm very vocal about it. Everyone that I mentor or that comes to me with questions about it, it's one of the first things I open up with to say, I don't have a degree. Like, it's okay. And you learn those skills by doing and by really getting out there. And that's where your entrepreneurial skills would have also really helped you catapult forward. Because not only do you have to solve those problems, like you mentioned, but you had to solve them when you took on that path. So it gave you a lot of those transferable skills that we talk about so often on this podcast, because it's a backbone to this journey.
Yeah. Santi, I think that's a really great point, because I think that there's kind of this thought process, and I've mentored people, or college students, master's students, like PhD students who have wanted to get into product management. And I think the thing that to me has always struck me is like degree, no degree, all of that is kind of semantics. It's a mindset of like, I think that people who did not go to university or go to, have a higher education degree, like there's a sense of figure it the fuck out. And like, that's really what it kind of breaks down to. Whereas, and I worked with a nonprofit that did a lot of like marketing leadership for college students and universities. And one of the things that I talked to them a lot about was this concept of higher education typically, like, or it lends itself to getting constant or giving constant feedback. And that's not something that you get in product management. It's not something that you really get in the business world in general, but especially in product management, because no one is there feeding you like, yes, that is the right answer, or like, no, you got that wrong. So, but it's okay. Like, go try it again. Or you got it wrong. It's okay. You'll get it next time. That doesn't exist. It's try it. If you fail, pick it back up, try something else, like pivot, shift. And product management, I think, is a constant beatdown on ego. Like nothing ever works how you want it or how you envision it to. And I think that the more you go to those institutional knowledge places, the less you're able to kind of figure that out, and just like have that figure it the fuck out mindset.
Yeah, it's grit. And I love that you called out that it's nothing really ever works exactly how we envision it. I was watching a webinar once. I believe it was Steve Haynes. It was a little while back, but he gave some advice. He was like, look, everything that you're going to do, it's going to be harder than it looks. And there's a lot more to it than initially meets the eye. Sometimes we're pleasantly surprised, and that's not the case, but more often than not, everything is harder than it looks. It's going to take more than what we think. And I have found that to be a really great expectation setting for myself when it comes to these things. Like, we're going to try these things. We're going to have to be gracious with ourselves because it will fail at some point. Some part in this process, something's going to go wrong. Something's going to fail. A mistake's going to be made. I love, especially coming from like a lead PM, I think that's a message that our listeners, even us on the call, need to hear sometimes. It's okay to fail, pivot, shift, and keep going. So I just want to call out that I absolutely love that you mentioned that, because I think it helps people with that expectation setting, because there's so many different ways that product management can go. Some people don't even know what to expect when they get into this type of work. So thank you for bringing that to light, because that is so important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do want to also call out though, and I think that like it's really important to distinguish product management between anything under a Series D and anything over a Series D company, because I think it looks drastically different. Anybody who sits there and listens and reads through every Lenny thing, all the power to you, but also just realize that that's not like 80%, 90% of the companies. And I think that that's really going back to setting proper expectations. Like, the majority of these organizations, first of all, probably don't really know what you're supposed to be doing as a product manager. They've just hired you to like fill a gap. And secondarily, like, I don't know, I just keep going back to like, yeah, just figure it out. Like, get in there. Like, this is your job. And like, your job is to add value and create value for the business. That's your job. Like, figure out how to do that. Sometimes that means marketing. Sometimes that means, building an app. Sometimes that means saying, you know what, this app is not adding value, so let's kill it. Like, that, there's, your job is to add value. And that means a lot of different things to a lot of different places and to a lot of different stakeholders.
For sure. I think that one thing that you said kind of stood out to me about there being like a separation of how product management works before Series D and then after Series D. And, I typically work in startups. I know Santi, she has a startup background and she's currently at 100 to less than 100 business. So I know that she's kind of in that realm as well. I believe you said Little Otter is pretty small as well, right? Yeah. So we're all startup people on this call. And so like my experience with product management has been very like, there's no process. So you figure out what you need to build and build it. And like anything is better than what we have now. And that's been my experience. So I'm curious, Brody, like coming into Little Otter, what did that look like?
Exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, really, I think in every organization, it's typically I think I've found my sweet spot approaching like 12 years in the industry. I found my sweet spot in understanding what kind of company I thrive at. And like, that kind of company is coming in and figuring out the spaghetti mess that's everywhere and cleaning it up. This is so nerdy, but like, one of my hobbies is cable management. Like, I love cable management, and and I feel like that's like a lot of my job is like, how do I clean this up? How do I make things streamlined and more efficient while being able to like scale for the future? That to me is like where my sweet spot is, and I absolutely love that. I don't think Little Otter is any different. The one thing that I do think, though, specifically about Little Otter, and this is a criteria that I've learned over time and over making this mistake many different times, is that every startup is going to have its messes. It's going to need to have cleanup, and it's going to need to have you to come in and define certain processes. However, the one thing I love about Little Otter is that they have a business outside of all of those messes. So, like, a lot of companies, I think, over leverage their technology strategy to solve the problems that they have as a business. Whereas like Little Otter, you could eliminate the majority of the technology and like they would still have a pretty solid business because it's a services business, right? It's not like a SaaS product or anything like that. It's a services business. And they've figured out how to do that well. The technology is supplementing that. It's streamlining it. It's making it more efficient and more scalable. That to me is a really important criteria when looking for a startup company, because what I don't want to do, and what I have done a few times, is look at startup companies who have invested far too heavily in their technology. And it's very sexy in the beginning coming into a place like that. It's like, oh my gosh, they invest so much in their engineering and their people and like everything like that. But the question is like, if you eliminated the majority of that, would they still have a business strategy that works? And if the answer is no, then you're probably going into a mess that is just far too complicated because they have just dumped too much money. Their burn rate is too high. And like you're probably not going to do anything of like significant value to grow the business. You're only going to be trying to make the business work.
Yeah. I mean, I was in that SaaS company that if their product failed, they had nothing. And now I'm in a services business that has a supplemental SaaS product. And so I can totally relate to that. I don't know if we touched on this technically. We talked a little bit about it, but I don't know if we technically touched on it. So I want to ask anyway, if you wanted to share anything in particular about like your journey landing your first role in product management.
Yeah, sure. I'll share. I mean, I think that this is, I believe in full transparency. Like I think as we've talked about, my path to product management like was doing a lot of different jobs that all like related around things that product managers typically do, but I was never explicitly called a product manager. And again, like a lot of it was just how do I add value to the business, create those processes, make the end user experience better, like streamline that kind of stuff, grow the business. That was always the roles. When I realized that there was a real hot opportunity in this world of product management space, and I wanted to have like a career path within product management because I loved the frameworks and I loved the thought process and I loved just that like make the end user experience the best it can be and add value to the business. When I realized that, I was like, I got to start applying to product management jobs. And I believe, I would have to go back and check my Notion, but I believe that I interviewed to 92 companies before I landed a job. And this was at a time period when like I was doing the job already. But because everybody was just trying to figure out what a product manager like what does a good product manager look like, which we like clearly has still not answered. I think, that to me, I absolutely kind of like I faked it until I made it in a lot of these interviews. And I made it to a lot of final rounds. And it was going to be like which company was willing to take the equal bet on me and or didn't know enough to like not hire me. And like I'll be honest, like I think the reason, and I say this to a lot of people that I mentor, is like when you get rejected from a job, there are so many reasons why that could have been, and it is absolutely no reflection of you as an individual, and frankly, your skill set or anything that surrounds you. Like interviewing for a job is one of the weirdest things that any person has to do in this world. And frankly, interviewing someone is also an incredibly interesting practice. And none of it really makes a lot of sense. And so, like, when you're in the interview process and when you're getting rejected, it's always important to be like, this is another situation that, like, I just got to figure it out, And for me, that first product role, I knew that I could do the job. I knew that I could do the 92 jobs that I got turned down for, but there was a disconnect, The exact same thing as dating. Like, I went on a lot of dates before I found my wife, and like, who knows? Maybe they could have been great, but like, there was something that just wasn't right there.
Yep. That is a really good story, really good analogy too, because it's like that, right? I hear from many different people, like a lot of the times once they get to a certain level in their career or on the path that they're on, they'll say like, at this point in my career, I'm not looking for, like comp or this and that. Like I'm looking for companies that I can get behind, that I align with and that I know together we will create great things. And so the disconnect piece is just another kind of fact of life for me, like, because it happens, right? Like we disconnect with, there could be people, it could be a thing, it could be just like anything really. So I think it's still important to call that out, that in the journey into product, there will be times where there is that disconnect, or there's that little bit of misalignment from either side, really. Could be, or just both. Just be like, you know what, this happened to me actually a while back. A recruiter had reached out to me and they were like, yeah, we'd love for you to interview, blah, blah, blah. So I thanked them and I was like, okay, like I'd be happy just to have kind of like a preliminary chat. And at the end of the interview, I was kind of like, nope, this is just not going to be something that I'm aligned with. And that's totally okay. Just because I wasn't feeling the vibes doesn't mean that someone else won't fit very well into this role. So it's just about being honest and having those conversations. You spoke about skill sets as well, in terms of had already been doing the role for a bit. I was curious if there was a particular skill that you had developed over your professional career that you found to be incredibly helpful for you getting into product.
Yes, absolutely. Early in my career, before product management was even a thought in my life, I was really obsessed with this idea of adaptive communication. And adaptive communication, in my mind, is you're talking to a lot of different people, and it has nothing to do with what you say. It has to do with what they hear. And the ability to cater your message to that particular individual so that they hear what you are trying to tell them, rather than you just saying the same message over and over and over to different types of people. That skill set of adaptive communication, to me, has served me incredibly well in product management. And it was like, that was something that I was really obsessed with, the idea of, like, really early on in my career, because I thought I wanted to be a journalist. And so, like, thinking through, like, that was like what I thought I wanted to do. And then I was on the radio, and then I realized that there's zero money in any journalism thing.
Love the honesty.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it was rough. It was rough. It was a lot of fun though. But yeah, it was like one of those things where I realized that skill set and the ability to translate your ideas to communicate with someone else in how they expect or how they want to be talked to is probably the most important and valuable skill set that I've carried with me throughout my career.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. On the flip side, now I'm curious, has there been any skills that you've had to unlearn as you've journeyed into product and continued to be in product?
All of them except adaptive communication. I joke about this a little bit with my coach, because I think one of the things that I have struggled with a lot is understanding, like, who do I want, like, how do I want to show up whenever I get a new job or whenever I go into a new company, or whether I'm trying to make a career move or something like that. I think that there's this false narrative around, like, be yourself and be who you, like, just be who you are. Because going back to the adaptive communication thing, like, who I am is only for me. Like, that's for me, that's for my family, that's, but, like, who I am at work, this is a job. I have to show up differently at my job than I do everywhere else in my life. And so I think unlearning this, like, who should I be, or like who, or I should just, like, feel comfortable in what I'm doing, like, unlearning that, and then all of the skills and things that, like, kind of weigh me down based on that. I think that's one of the things that, like, I constantly have to unlearn, because I need to show up differently in different contexts when it matters. I don't know. Like, I don't know if that kind of felt a little babbly, but yeah, it's definitely, I think that there's just a disconnect where people feel like they have to show up the same way to their job as they do in the rest of their life. And that's just not, you can't do that. Your job is your job. And, like, I am a firm believer of that. And that doesn't mean that you can't enjoy it and, like, have fun. And that's a huge part of who you are. But it doesn't mean that, like, you only have one self. It's, yeah.
I think that I get what you're saying about potentially, like, babbling or whatever, but I think that with the way you're trying to explain it, I'm resonating with, and I understand what you're saying, because I think we try so hard to like connect with those people that say like be your most authentic self all the time, right? And like show up as your most authentic self. But I think you can do that while showing up to work professionally and going home and being with your family, and they don't have to be the same person. So I totally agree with you, and I've never thought about it that way. So I appreciate you challenging my mindset on that and like having me think a little bit differently.
Yeah. I would also say, Santi, a more tactical thing to your question is that I have had to work tirelessly on ensuring that I am staying in the problem space rather than jumping into the solution space. Because I think when I was younger, I was actually telling this to somebody the other day. When I was younger, people like celebrated solutions because I was young. It actually had nothing to do with like solutions or problems or anything like that. It was like, like you're this young guy who has all these solutions and like you can come in and help us. And like, especially from an entrepreneurial standpoint, like my job was to create solutions for businesses, and like that was celebrated, and that's what I was supposed to do. What worked for me then does not work for me now. And like now my whole thing is pushing people to stay in the problem space far longer than they're comfortable with. And like I need to do that to myself sometimes. But I would say like it actually wasn't, I don't think that that was a learned skill from a career perspective. I actually think that that's a maturity thing, to be completely honest. I think that like everyone when they're younger wants to hop into the solution, and people celebrate that because it's really cool and it's fun and it's exciting. And it's like, like I have a 1-year-old son, and when he does anything in the solution space, I'm like, hell yeah, like you fucking figured that out. Like that was awesome. And I celebrate that. But like when he's like, banging two things together, I'm like, like just figure it out. Now that I'm like thinking about this, I'm like, I should reverse that thought process, and I should be celebrating the problem space, like when he's trying to figure things out. And like when it's a solution, it's like, yeah, cool, you got it. Like that was good, man. And I think like I just think it's a maturity thing. And I think that it's a natural progression that people end up working their way out of. But I think the faster somebody can move into that problem space more, like if they're coming out of school or they're in school and living in that, I think the faster they will succeed from a career perspective.
I love that, because I can say myself and my team, we've been really focusing on what problems are we solving, because, and I'm going to be doing a presentation on this at some point as well, but it's one thing, yeah, like solutions are great, and sometimes we do just need to have like a quick, like, okay, here's a quick thing, like we got it, totally get it, but it comes down to the fact like we need to really deeply understand that problem, because any solution that does eventually come from that work needs to really solve that problem. Those quick snap things that come out of, quick conversations, you might get lucky and it might actually solve it. But realistically, I've noted like in some cases, it's more just like a band-aid versus like solving the actual root. And so I love that you touch on the fact that the quote that I got from this is be in the problem space for far longer than you're comfortable with. I love that because it is such a good challenge we can take on ourselves. And I think as PMs, like I said, myself and my team, we're actively doing that now. And I think others are really catching on to that and just spending that time rooted in that problem space to figure out where to go from here. That does not mean we'll have a solution tomorrow, but it means if we deeply understand the problem, the solutions that eventually come will have a much higher success rate, hypothetically, because we come from that deep space understanding the problem.
Yeah, I think and I think one of the things that you touched on, I think so many companies, leadership teams, I would say specifically, are really worried about when they hear product managers talk about, living in the problem space, is that there's a misconception that there's not solutions in the problem space. The problem space is a very large space. It is a void. And you have you should have a large problem to solve. And there are many, many different solutions that plug into that problem space. But that doesn't mean that you have solved the problem. It means that you are inching closer and you are iteratively working to solve the actual problem and get out of that problem space. And I think that like it's a common misconception where like there is the problem space and the solution space. The solution space is like, how do we completely figure out the problem and execute on that and like drop that problem completely? It doesn't mean that there's not iterative solutions that are happening all the time. You can call them experiments, you can call them tests, you can call them whatever you want. Some work, some don't. They're all solutions, but they are all still living with inside that problem space.
Very, very interesting. I like hearing all of this. This is very, I don't know. I personally don't have like a big team to float these cool ideas off of. Like I work with a really small team. And so the perspective is really cool. I want to make sure we have enough time to talk about like the current state of product management and where it's going, because you mentioned it at the very beginning. And I just want to make sure that we get to it because I feel like it's something going to talk about. So we can either prompt a question or you can just like have at it. Which direction do you want to go?
Just have at it.
All right. So I'm all ears. Go for it, Brody.
He's like, I hope you guys don't have hard stops.
So the current state of product management, I think, is incredibly interesting. I think my hot take, the TLDR of all of this is that like I don't think the product management really exists in 10 years as it does today. That doesn't mean, I think though, like after our entire conversation, I think it still means that like we are product managers at the root and at the heart. But one of the interesting things that I've come across in my own like coaching business is coaching people out of product management. So like people who are in product management who no longer want to be in product management. And like, how do you make that transition back to an engineering team or, a marketing person or something like that? And I think what I've found, which is really interesting, is that like the product management role, again, this is talking more about the 80% of companies, not the 20% of companies who have, product managers. I don't think that they will exist in those companies in 10 years either. The way that Google, for instance, works is there are so many different product managers doing so many different things, and 90% of all of their work does not go anywhere. Like that's the default. The default at a company like that is to do nothing, because it's more costly to do something than it is to do nothing. Whereas the 80% of companies, it's more costly to do nothing than it is to do something. And so, like, I think that there will always be people who need to create the most value for the organization. I don't think that it will be product management. I don't know what that looks like right now. They're starting to call those people chief of staffs, right? It's a completely different thing than what existed, 2 years ago. Chief of staffs were incredibly tactical. They were very different in terms of like what the role of chief of staff was. Now I see all of these product managers entering in to chief of staff roles, but it's the product thinking mindset. And that to me is like, that's what product management used to be. I don't think it's going to stay that way. I don't believe that product managers who are very good at the product management skill set today are going to go anywhere, but I don't think that they will be considered to be product managers. I think that the product management position will probably fall more to senior positions in other teams and in other cross-functional teams. So I think there's like junior product managers, APMs, you're seeing a huge decrease in the industry of hiring these people. And unfortunately, I think that's the right thing. Like, because the APM role or the junior product manager role is no more than a scrum master at most companies. And like, Why did we ever get rid of Scrum Masters? I'm not sure. But like, that's what they've turned into be. Or a business analyst. Like there used to be business analysts all over the place, and they would write requirements and they would understand from an engineering perspective what needed to happen, and they would look at the business as a whole and they would translate those things. They all became product managers, and not all of them are good at product management. They might have been a really good business analyst. That doesn't mean that you're a good product manager. And so I think like we have for so long tried to figure out what a product manager is and what makes you a good product manager or a senior product manager or a lead product manager. Like, I'm a lead product manager because I lead product management. It's not because I'm like exponentially better at product management than somebody else. Like, it's not my seniority necessarily. It's just where I sit in the company, I lead product management. That's it. Like that's my, and so I think that we've discussed and we've tried to over engineer what product management is as a career and as a role. And, I'm very cautious to tell people to get into product management because I want to make sure that like their intentions are rooted in what actual product management is to me, which is like creating the most value for the business at any point in time.
Do you think part of that comes from lack of understanding of what product management is in general?
Yeah. I think it's twofold. I think one is a lack of understanding about product management. And then I think the other piece is a lack of businesses having a specific need for product management skills.
That makes sense. I've seen a lot of businesses hire too early for PMs and then hire them in lieu of other positions as well.
Or too late.
Yes.
Or too late. They hire them too late. And then you're not really looking for a product manager. You're looking for a fixer. There's a lot of product managers who are fixers. And that's great. But like, would I consider that to be a product manager? Not necessarily.
Santi, what's your take?
Yeah, I've been like mulling this all over too because there's so many different points of views out here when it comes to this area. And I do agree. And I think what you're saying here, like it really just drives home the point that I was told early on in my product career that just product management, the root of it, there are like some like foundational pieces that span across the product management space, but how it's implemented at each company is different. That's why when people say if you ask 5 different product managers what product management is, you get 5 different answers, and it's because of these things we're talking about now. It's almost, I can almost talk about this for like 20 minutes myself because it's like it's so dependent on like the industry that you're in, the company, the stage of the company, the people you work with, like the nuances within that team, the service, the product, whatever it is. But I agree that, yeah, at the core of it, there's a lot of overlap with other functions, but that doesn't mean it's always a true product role. And that's okay. Like, that is okay, right? And that some people might really thrive in that type of role. But when it comes to really fleshing out, like, those foundational pieces, there are definitely some things that are just kind of, that's the root of product. And it's worth talking about. So this is a good conversation because it is kind of bringing up that other side of the house of the themes that I'm seeing on like LinkedIn and in the product community. Folks are just chatting about, the different ways that PMs operate and what they do. And I think this is a really good conversation just to show some of that nuance because it really isn't it's not cookie cutter. You can't really cookie cut this at all.
Yeah. I think one of the key points that you mentioned there is and this isn't any different than any other career path.
Exactly.
But for whatever reason, it feels different in product management, which is for Megan and myself, like if we're in a services business, that's completely different than a SaaS business where they have a full on, PLG movement. It's completely different. And so the problems that you're solving, how you're solving those problems, the skill set needed. And then you think about a services business and then you have to break it down into B2B, and D2C or however you want to do that. There's some product managers that thrive in B2B and they could never, ever do D2C, and vice versa, because it's a completely different skill set and the job is completely different. There are definitely, Santi, to your points, the underlying, kind of foundation, I guess, of what product management is. But I would argue that that's really just product thinking. It's the ability to identify the problems and like create meaningful solutions to those problems. And like that's the underlying root. A lot of the frameworks are really solid in that, team communication and collaboration is really important in that. Those are the foundational pillars of product management. But at the end of the day, like I've also seen some just really good senior people on cross-functional teams who do the exact same thing. And they are also incredibly effective. And so is there a need for the product management position in the future? I don't know. I think that's it's a very interesting question.
It's a good challenging question. And I like your perspective on it. And I think it's good for us to stay challenged. I think it's good for us to keep that as a challenging question and not always be confident in our jobs and constantly reevaluate our position in our business and whether or not we're providing value to our business as well. I think that's incredibly important.
I also just want to comment that I think it's pretty funny that like I sometimes wonder this, like the reason why this problem doesn't seem to exist in other career spaces is maybe because they're not product managers, because they're not thinking about things like this. Like what is the actual problem of like is product management broken? No. Like every product manager is just kind of working on themselves, or they should be. If you're trying to like be the best product manager, it's never going to happen. You have to be the best product manager for yourself and for your company. And like that means something different to everybody. And so like, I sometimes wonder, like, is this question only being raised because like it's the philosophers of companies, aka product managers, who are asking it?
It's a good point.
That's totally fair. And I think I always say this on each of these episodes, but I really do see just so many things through like some of those like foundational product management practices, like the iteration, like the constant learning, the evolving and things like that. I take that same approach to myself, to the things I work on, my career, like everything to me is like its own little product. And I move with that kind of headspace. So I think this is a valid question to have. And I think it's okay if we don't have all the answers right now. Because I see your point, Brody, like the need for what we do, I can't see that ever like going away. The title might change for sure. Maybe it becomes something different, but I think the core of what we do, that's still going to live in some way, shape, or form in companies, no matter where, right? It's just one of those things. It just might look a little different, or it might be called something differently, or it might have some new ways of executing upon it. It's all, like I said, it's almost like a product. You just see what works, what doesn't, and move and grow.
Yeah. I completely agree. Going back to the conversation around like, if you want to break into product management, or like, what do you do? Like my take is always like, go after another career path. And then like, if you find yourself in product, great. But like, use the product thinking, use the product foundations in whatever job you get. Like typically, if you're young, if you're out of college, you're trying to make money, you need a job, like go find a job. Go find a customer success or a customer support role. Go find a sales role. Go find any role. Go find an engineering role, a junior engineering role. And like just use the product foundations and you'll find your way into a product role at some point in time. But if you try to, and I think this is one of the really interesting parts about product management, is that I don't think there is a career path for product management. I think product management is just a role. It is a role in the company. I don't think that it is a career path, because frankly, like I've thought about this often. I'm kind of at the ceiling. Like if I go to another company, what am I going to do differently? I either have to like manage a bunch of other product managers, which I'm kind of doing the exact same thing, or like there's not a huge like trajectory in product management. You just kind of are. And I think that that's something that we've tried to force, this like product management career path. And I don't think that exists truly.
Yeah, that sticks out to me because I've been asked that question in interviews, like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I'm like, this, like, I don't know. Like, I don't have an answer for you. I'm doing what I'm doing. That's
Right.
where I see myself.
Yeah. Like I'm right. Like I don't know what I'm going to do differently. I'm going to work on different problems. I'm going to solve larger problems or, you know, things at larger scale. That's what I hope. But also maybe not. Like I'm still going to be doing the same thing.
Yeah, there's not a lot of change in that role unless you want to go executive level or VP level, which is definitely not my dream. And so that answer to that 5-year question, it's hard to answer when it comes to product management. And it's not something that's difficult to answer in other roles, in my opinion. So yeah, I just find that funny and very relatable. I want to be mindful of time. Is there anything that you haven't had a chance to share that you want to share still? Because we only have a few minutes left and I just want to be mindful of your time.
No. I mean, this has been awesome. You know, I love this shit.
Absolutely love it. So my last question, arguably the most important question of this whole episode. What's your most controversial food opinion?
So when we have our engineering stand-ups, you know, we always do an icebreaker in the beginning of the week, and all of my icebreakers have to do with food. And so we get into this argument almost every week because it's a different topic. This particular week was that I will die on this hill that Cooper Sharp is the only cheese for a sandwich. But then we raised a really interesting point, which is that it really depends on the sandwich, because like then it gets into like, how do you define a sandwich? Because you know, I mean, if you're thinking about like if you're thinking about a hot roast pork sandwich or something like that, like you're probably going to choose provolone. But like if you're just going straight deli meat, you know, 2 pieces of bread, I think you have to put Cooper Sharp on it.
What about grilled
Brody, I
cheese?
have another.
I mean, grilled cheese is really important here.
Grilled cheese is difficult because it depends on the fanciness that you would like your grilled cheese. Because like I've made grilled cheese with Gouda with, you know, and you throw some tomato and some basil on there and like boom, it's a delicious sandwich. It's a fancy grilled cheese. Straightforward grilled cheese, you could probably just use American, but you could also use, you know, like just the yellow Kraft single packaged, horrible for the environment grilled cheese. And can you beat that? I'm not sure.
I have strong thoughts and opinions about Kraft single slices. I won't get into it on this podcast, but just know I hate them. My final question, are hot dogs a sandwich?
So here's the thing, Santi. I've obviously thought about this quite a bit. A hot dog is not a sandwich because a hot dog is the actual link itself. If you put it inside of a bun, then yes, maybe it is. But the hot dog, you can't necessarily say, if you would like to, I believe that we should be calling it a hot dog sandwich, not just a hot dog. Like a hot dog does not mean that it requires a bun. And that to me is a really key, important distinction. I believe that just our wording and our framing is wrong, that we should be calling it a hot dog sandwich if it includes a bun.
I think we should end on that. No comments allowed.
Yeah, that's not up for debate.
No comments allowed. Just end on that. Because I have opinions. I'm sure you have opinions. And I don't think we're allowed to share them. We just end on that. Everyone, we just want to know, do you feel like a hot dog is a sandwich? Let us know in the comments. Because this feels like a controversial food opinion.
It's completely controversial. But at the same time, I don't think anybody can argue with me.
Maybe that'll be like the only thing that we share from this episode is we'll just share a snippet of all of your opinions about a hot dog being a sandwich and say, let's see if anyone can argue with Brody about this controversial food. Can anyone prove Brody wrong about hot dogs being a sandwich?
Yes.
Don't interview at Little Otter.
Don't interview at Little Otter. It's the world's most rigorous interview.
My God. Okay, this has been so much fun. I want to be mindful of time, but we really appreciate you coming on.
I seriously just appreciate so much of this, Brody. You had so many good insights to really chew on, and I'm so grateful for that. So thank you for your time and just like the intention you put into your answers and giving your all for the episode. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you guys.